Good afternoon. I'm here to talk about the Department of the Prosecuting Attorney's independent investigation involving the deadly force used against Dallas Pearce on January 6, 2020. The investigative questions we always ask: first, was the use of deadly force justified against Dallas Pearce? Second, will any charges be filed against the Honolulu Police Department sergeant and officer in connection with the case? And our investigation has determined that the use of deadly force which resulted in the death of Pearce was justified. As a result, no charges will be filed against either the police sergeant or the police officer involved in the case. Here's Mr. Pearce. And you can see the location of this incident, and you can see the corner, near the corner of Oko Street and Molo Street. It's the second guest parking space there, and you can see the weather was partly cloudy. This is a surveillance photo taken on the far right in the parking lot. You can see the PT Cruiser nose in. Now, general background. On April 11, 2012, Pearce was convicted of burglary in the first degree. The court sentenced him to 5 years probation. Subsequently, on July 30th of 2012, the court revoked his probation and resentenced Pearce to an indeterminate term of 10 years in prison. In 2019, Pearce was placed in the Laumaka Work Furlough Program. Now, to give you a chronological summary of events on Monday, January 6th, to find out how we got here. So in November of 2019, Pearce failed to return to the Laumaka Work Furlough Program, and an escape in the second degree report with an attempt to locate status was initiated against him. And on Monday, January 6th, District 4 Crime Reduction Units, crew units, the D4 crew received information that Pearce was dating a female, Witness 1. This information further noted that Witness 1 was living at Aikahi Gardens and drove a PT Cruiser with a Hawaii license plate. As a result, and you can see in this picture, the PT Cruiser's on the right, and then that's Dallas Pearce walking toward the PT Cruiser. And as a result of this information, officers from the D4 crew, including Sergeant 1 and Officer 1, began to look around Aikahi Gardens for Pearce and Witness 1. And on October 6, 2020, Sergeant 1 and Officer 1 drove down Oko Street. And you can see they were headed down Oko Street toward Molo Street, and there's the PT Cruiser that was pulled face in. And they spotted the PT Cruiser belonging to Witness 1 parked in a guest parking stall. They saw that the front and back passenger side windows had a very dark tint. Sergeant 1 observed what appeared to be a head moving around in the front driver's seat. So they stopped their car right behind the PT Cruiser, blocking it, and both got out. Both Sergeant 1 and Officer 1 were in plain clothes. They had ballistic vests, bulletproof vests, with police markings on the front and back. They had their police badges on their belts and their IDs on lanyards around their necks. Sergeant 1 saw the male in the driver's seat fidgeting with a key in his right hand, trying to insert a key in the ignition. Sergeant 1, immediately said, "Police, what is your name?" The male responded, "James," which didn't match. Sergeant 1 asked for his last name. The male hesitated. He had a cell phone in his left hand and said he was going to call his girl. At that point, Sergeant 1 recognized the male as Pearce. Officer 1, now at the ajar driver's side door, saw that the male was holding the cell phone in his left hand and was trying to hide something next to his right leg and the center console with his right hand. Sergeant 1 saw the male place his right hand near his right pocket area. Officer 1 then was able to see the male's face, and he as well positively identified him as Pearce. Officer 1 pulled open the driver's side door and said, "Dallas, it's over, give it up." Officer 1 saw Pearce digging vigorously with his right hand into his pocket. Sergeant 1 then went around the back of the PD cruiser and saw that Officer 1 was trying to pull Pearce out of the vehicle. Sergeant 1 reached through the open window and unlocked the rear driver's side door of the PT cruiser. And he leaned in and grabbed Pearce's right arm. So you can see, this is a picture of the PT cruiser with both front and rear doors open. You can see how crowded it is in here. So Pearce is in here. Officer 1 is trying to pull him out. The Sergeant 1 is right behind the driver's seat trying to reach over as they're struggling with Pearce. And he leaned in and grabbed, this is Sergeant 1, leaned in and grabbed Pearce's right arm. Sergeant 1 and Officer 1 then both used verbal commands and physical force trying to stop Pearce. However, Pearce kept resisting their efforts. Witness 1, Pearce's girlfriend, approached the driver's side door saying, "Leave him alone." Sergeant 1 pushed her away, and then he moved to the rear of the driver's seat again to assist Officer 1 in apprehending Pearce. Pearce started pulling Officer 1 into the PD cruiser, and Officer 1 found himself on top of Pearce. Officer 1 yelled, "He has a gun," twice to Sergeant 1. Sergeant 1 then punched the right side of Pearce's head twice, several times. Then he drew his firearm, but due to Officer 1 and Pearce struggling in the front seat, he didn't have a clear shot at that point. Seeing that Pearce was attempting to create a distance, pulling himself back from Officer 1 toward the front passenger seat in order to draw a weapon, Officer 1 drew his firearm with his right hand, pointed it at Pearce, and ordered him to show his hands, to show both hands. Believing that Pearce posed an immediate threat, Officer 1, who still had his firearm in his right hand, punched Pearce in the face with his left fist. Then, using his left hand, Officer 1 grabbed a hold of Pearce's right hand, which was deep in his right pocket. But Officer 1, losing his grip on Pearce's right hand, then saw Pearce pulling out what appeared to be a pistol out of his right front pocket. Officer 1 yelled to Sergeant 1 to shoot Pearce. "I'm losing him. Shoot him. Shoot him." Sergeant 1 saw that Pearce's right hand was next to his right front pants pocket. It appeared he was trying to pull something out of his pocket. At this point, fearing for his life and Officer 1's life, Sergeant 1 shot Pearce several times, hitting him in the back and arm. Pearce, right at that point, looked at Officer 1, yelled, "You fucker," and continued to try and draw the pistol from his right front pants pocket. Fearing for his life, Officer 1 then pushed away from Pearce and fired one shot, hitting him in the abdomen. Witness 1 then opened the front passenger side door and began grabbing Pearce. Sergeant 1 gave several verbal commands for Witness 1 to get away from the vehicle. Sergeant 1 held cover of Pearce while Officer 1 moved toward Witness 1. Sergeant 1 then moved to the front passenger side of the PT cruiser to assist Officer 1. Sergeant 1 notified dispatch of the shooting and informed dispatch to expedite an ambulance to the location. He secured, officer after one secured witness one, Sergeant one then searched Pearce's front pocket where he had been reaching. He found what appeared to be a black semi-automatic handgun in Pearce's right front pants pocket. And that's what he recovered. Attempting to render the weapon safe, Sergeant one checked the bottom where the magazine would have been inserted. He saw there was a hatch where a CO2 cartridge could be inserted, and at that point he realized the weapon was a pellet gun or an airsoft gun. Sergeant one then placed it on the roof of the PT Cruiser. Sergeant one then pulled Pearce out of the vehicle to provide medical treatment. After handcuffing Pearce, Sergeant one applied chest compressions, and Officer one went to the police vehicle to retrieve medical equipment. After Officer one placed gauze on Pearce's wounds, they rolled Pearce onto his back and gave him chest compressions until other officers arrived to assist. They arrived and assisted in providing medical attention. Subsequently, an ambulance, EMS, and the fire department also arrived to administer first aid to Pearce. The ambulance transported Pearce to Adventist Castle Hospital. He was pronounced dead on January 6, 2020 at 4:06 p.m. And on the same day, on January 6th, at about 8:30 p.m., Medical Transport of Hawaii drove Pearce's body to the office of the medical examiner, City and County of Honolulu. The next day, as the investigation continued, on January 7th, witness one was interviewed and said Pearce was an on and off boyfriend. She knew he was an escapee sometime around Thanksgiving she said, from seeing it on the news. Witness one said she confronted Pearce about his status and told him he could not stay with her. She said she did allow him to take a shower about once a week. Witness one said Pearce had told her he didn't want to turn himself in during the holidays or his birthday, which was sometime in January. She said that on January 6th, Pearce had called her, said he was outside and wanted to take a shower. She said she told him she was taking a shower then, but she gave him the keys to her PT Cruiser and told him to wait. Witness one said after she got out of the shower, Pearce called her and said someone was going to shoot him. She looked out the window and saw a commotion within her PT Cruiser. Witness one ran outside yelling, "Stop," towards everyone. She said both officers were hitting Pearce, who was struggling with the officers. She could not see Pearce's hand and didn't know why he was struggling with the officers. Witness one said one of the officers told her to back off and pushed her away after she yelled at everyone to stop. Witness one said she was standing in a nearby grassy area and heard 3 shots. She ran to the front passenger side of the PT Cruiser, opened the door, grabbed Pearce, and held him. She said the officer grabbed her, threw her to the ground, and handcuffed her. The officers then put her in the police car. Witness one said she had seen Pearce in the past with a toy BB gun, and witness one said that it resembled a pistol and had an orange tip to show that it was not a real gun. When she was shown a photograph of the weapon that was recovered from Pearce's pocket, she said the weapon resembled the one she had seen Pearce having before, except that in the photo the tip was black. Witness one also said the weapon in the photo resembled a real gun. Witness number 2, another resident of Waikahi Gardens, said that on January 6th at about 3:15 p.m. he saw 2 officers wrestling with a person in the PT Cruiser. He said he saw a female interfering with the officers and yelling, "Leave him alone, don't do that." Witness 1 said he heard about 2 shots, and shortly after, 2 more shots. Witness 2 said an officer came out of the PT Cruiser, handcuffed the female, then put her in the police car, went back to the PT Cruiser. He said one of the officers entered the passenger side of the vehicle and pulled out a black pistol from the PT Cruiser and left it on the top of the vehicle. Witness 2 then said both officers pulled a male out of the PT Cruiser and began to check his wounds and begin to administer first aid. Okay, medical examiner findings. On January 7, 2020, at about 9 a.m., forensic pathologist Dr. John Gates performed an autopsy on Pearce. Dr. Gates found that Pearce had 3 gunshot wounds to his back, 1 to his arm, and 1 to his abdomen. Dr. Gates noted that Pearce had abrasions to his head, forehead, and elbows, and bruises to his wrists. Dr. Gates determined the cause of death of Pearce was multiple gunshot wounds. Toxicology exam was done on Pearce and confirmed the presence of methamphetamine and amphetamine in his blood. Now, Pearce's criminal history, he had convictions for, back in 2012, burglary in the first degree, 2011, promoting a dangerous drug in the third degree, and prohibited acts relating to drug paraphernalia. Now, we also look at the officer's use and attempted use of non-deadly force. Visually, Officer 1 was driving a marked blue and white police car. Sergeant 1 and Officer 1 were wearing ballistic vests with police on the front and back, their badges on their belt, their IDs on lanyards. And this was during the day. It was partly cloudy, very visible. Sergeant 1 told Pearce, what is your name? And Sergeant 1 and Officer 1 made numerous commands for Pearce to stop and surrender. Officer 1 tried to physically remove Pearce from the vehicle to take him into custody. Sergeant 1 and Officer 1 punched Pearce in the head several times in an attempt to subdue him. Okay, the analysis we look at what the potential defenses would be. Use of deadly force and self-protection. The use of deadly force in self-defense involves 2 issues. Did the actors use deadly force? No question about it. Sergeant 1 and Officer 1 both intentionally shot Pearce. Those shots were not accidents. Second, was the use of deadly force justified? We found yes. Sergeant 1 and Officer 1 were trying to arrest Pearce for escape. They made numerous verbal attempts to get him to surrender. They tried to restrain him multiple times. They punched him to try to take him into custody without success. When Pearce started to pull what appeared to be a pistol out of his pocket, they eventually both shot him to protect themselves from death or serious bodily injury. Second defense is use of deadly force for the protection of others. The use of deadly force in the defense of others involves 2 issues. First, did the actor, in this case Sergeant 1, use deadly force? Answer, yes. Sergeant 1 intentionally shot Pearce. Those shots were not an accident. So, second, was the use of deadly force justified? Yes, Sergeant 1 was attempting to arrest Pearce for escape. He made numerous verbal attempts to get Pearce to surrender. He tried to restrain Pearce multiple times, as did Officer 1. He punched him to try to take him into custody without success. Officer 1 yelled to Sergeant 1 to shoot Pearce, saying, "I'm losing him, shoot him, shoot him." When Pearce started to pull what appeared to be a pistol out of his pocket, Sergeant 1 shot him to protect Officer 1 from death or serious bodily injury. So, in conclusion, the use of deadly force, which resulted in Pearce's death, was justified. Sergeant 1 and Officer 1 were justified in using deadly force in order to defend themselves, and Sergeant 1 in defense of others. So no charges will be filed against either the Honolulu Police Department sergeant or the Honolulu Police Department officer involved in the incident at Aikahi Gardens on January 6, 2020. My number 1 job is public safety. Honolulu Police Department's number 1 job is public safety. Any use of deadly force is regrettable and it's tragic, but sometimes it's justified. And in this case, the police did what they had to do and they did it right. So they've got a tough job. At times it can be a deadly job. They did the job right this time. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Are the officers back back with the force? Do you know that?
Yes.
So they have returned then.
Yeah.
Has the family of Pearce filed anything against the city, or can you comment?
Not that we're aware of.
Why 2 years later? Is it because the investigation took a while?
Well, part of it was we tried to focus. I came into office a little over 2 years ago. We tried to focus first on the officer-involved shootings that happened since I came into office, and now we're making sure we're looking at and evaluating. We have division chiefs that are assigned to each of the officer-involved shootings. In this case, it was Mark Ewan, head of our screening intake division, smart guy, long history with the office, and so we're making sure we go back and look at any ones that happened before we came here for which no conclusions had been drawn.
And how many more of those investigations do you guys have?
I think there are a total of one that happened, another one that happened. There's another one the person is pending trial on, so we're not going to be doing anything about that. And there's another one that happened more recently in Waikiki that appeared to be a suicide by cop type of a situation in a hotel, but we're examining that to make our conclusion on that.
How many, I know it says numerous verbal commands are given. Do you know exactly the number of how many?
I don't, but it was over and over, and they were telling him repeatedly. It was visible. It was during the day. They're wearing ballistic vests. There's no question he knew they were police officers, and they told him over and over. They're trying to pull him out of the car, and that is a really intense struggle. You see how small the car is, 3 adult males in this small space fighting with each other. You know, that's why it's a scary job at times, and I think they saw a gun and they took the action that they had to.
And then, so he suffered from 4 gunshots? 4 gunshots?
5.
5. Okay.
Yep, 3 that hit in the back, 1 in the arm, and then 1 in the abdomen chest area. So 4 shots by Sergeant 1 and 1 shot by Officer 1.
Obviously there's been a lot of shootings. What's your message to the public, knowing like this is what the turnout can be, even when you have a replica handgun like the one that Pearce had?
Right. You know, if the police are going to arrest you, get arrested. You know, if you try to use deadly force against the police, you're going to get killed. I think the actual number of officer-involved shootings is going down. But people should be aware that the officer's job is to arrest people, it's to take people into custody. If he hadn't run away from La Maca, which always surprises me, they're at the end of their sentence, it's a work furlough program, they're going to get released, but people make stupid mistakes. If he had not run away from La Maca, he would have finished it, he would have been out on parole. You know, or if he turned himself in right away, instead of waiting for the holidays, or for his birthday, he'd still be alive today.
Do you know how much time he had left?
Well, when you're at La Maca, you're going to get paroled when the La Maca work furlough program is done. So you're near the end. They're transitioning you back. It's a good program. You don't want to have somebody go from the cell to the street if you can help it. They go from their cell into La Maca, so they work during the day, come back at night. It's a good program. We know public safety is trying to expand it. But it's a good bridge back to the world, because the same skills that you may use in custody are not the same skills that you want to use out on the street and dealing with the public and other people. So, you know, it's a tragic situation, but Mr. Pearce brought it upon himself, and I'm sorry to see it. But anytime, people should remember, anytime officers have to shoot somebody, especially if it kills them, the officers have to live with that, even though they're totally justified. There's nothing wrong with what they did. It's still a tough part of being a police officer, that they have to live with the fact knowing that they had killed somebody. But they sign up, for that, and it's a tough part of the job, but we salute them for that, because it is very difficult.
Do you know what the status of his on and on girlfriend's case is?
I don't right now. Okay, well, thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.